Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Wealth Conversation podcast with me, Tsitsi Mutiti. I guide high-achieving women on their journey to build lasting wealth so they can prepare for an abundant future in every area of their life. I hope that today's episode will help you to transform your relationship with money so you can make the choices that will enable you to create the opportunities and lasting wealth that you desire. Let's get straight into this week's episode. My guest for this episode is Joyce Osei. Joyce is on a mission to inspire, impact, and innovate with entrepreneurs and senior leaders in tech and beyond through diversity and inclusion. She is passionate about increasing the representation of people from marginalized backgrounds through video content because it's vital that people have a safe space to share their lived experiences. As part of tackling underrepresentation in diversity and inclusion, Joyce wrote and published her first book in 2020 called The Adventures of Amma and Kwessi in Barbados. She has also co-authored Voices of Hope, sharing her personal story of how she became an author to inspire and transform other people's lives, particularly women. Joyce continues to increase representation as she moderates conversations and creates a safe space for female business owners in Fempreneurs in Action on Clubhouse. Welcome, Joyce, to the Wealth Conversation podcast.
Hi, Sitsi. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Let's start right at the beginning. Please tell us a bit more about Joyce Osei.
Yeah, so I help senior leaders and entrepreneurs increase the representation of people, particularly people from marginalized backgrounds, in the digital content that they produce. So that could be either through video or blogs or even online events that they want to host. I help them with that. I'm also a wife, a mum of 2 children who inspired me to write my first children's book. And I love to travel when we're allowed to.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I like that. Love to travel when we're allowed to. The world has changed so much, hasn't it, in the last 18 plus months. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Joyce, you are a children's author. Can you share what made you decide to focus on that specifically in the last few years?
Yeah, sure. That is such a great question, because actually what happened was I'd been writing the book for quite a few years. The idea for the book came to me in 2011 when I was on maternity leave and pregnant with my son. And I used to read lots of stories to my daughter at the time. And I think after about a month of reading lots of different stories, the penny dropped that actually none of the characters looked like her. And so I just thought, why don't any of the characters look like my daughter? But then I never did anything with that idea because the baby was born and then, you go on leave and then you go back to work. So I never did anything with that. So it wasn't really until I started working in diversity and inclusion 4 years later that the penny dropped, when I came across a piece of research which talked about some of the things that impact a woman's career. And one of them was the fact that if a woman works in an organization and doesn't see anyone senior at the top that looks like her, she wouldn't necessarily think it's possible. And that's when I then made that connection between the question I asked myself, why don't any of the characters look like my daughter? And it was around that whole lack of role models or lack of representation, essentially. And that then set me on the journey of actually thinking about what this story will be.
That's amazing. And, you remind me of when I started working in financial services in the UK. And yeah, that was a big thing for me. Like, I thought I didn't belong because I couldn't see anyone senior who looked like me. So in without actually realizing it when the thought came into my mind,
Yeah.
it was actually my brain, putting two and two together, saying, you're at this level.
Yeah.
I was raised to be quite ambitious and to,
Mm.
go for, the highest level that I could.
Yeah.
Education is such a big thing in the African community. And
Mm-hmm.
it's all about the more educated you get, the higher you can get in the corporate world, you can get better jobs.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it just seemed like, okay, that won't be possible for me here because, yeah, I couldn't see anyone
Yeah. Yeah.
at the senior levels. Whereas back home in Zimbabwe, yes, it's a majority Black country. So you can see people at different levels and it's easier to aspire, isn't it? And feel like,
Absolutely.
yes, I
It,
can
then it
do it.
becomes possible, isn't it? As soon as you see
Yeah.
someone in a particular role or doing something that you've never even thought possible, it now suddenly is possible because it's been done. And so that was like such a light bulb moment because obviously 4 years prior, I didn't have the vocabulary, diversity and inclusion. I didn't have any of that insight. So I couldn't even express myself in the sense of what I had discovered. But I had identified a gap, which was there were a lack of Black characters in children's books. But it's interesting because, nothing happens before its time. I couldn't have explained that back in 2011. But then reading that report, I think in 2015, it all came together in that moment. But it's funny, it took 4 years for it to happen, right?
Yeah, well, it takes time for our brains to kind of, put things together and make
Yeah.
sense of it all, on top of everything else that you're doing.
Yeah. So I didn't choose to be an author. Again, that found me. And then in 2019, I sat down with a coach and then we went through a series of exercises and it was around my purpose. And what I found was that the purpose of the book and the whole book itself was really linked to my purpose. So up until then, I'd seen it as this kind of thing that I did on the side. And when I have time, I will write a little bit and all the rest of it. But after that conversation, I realized that book was clearly linked to my purpose and that actually I needed to focus on it. After that conversation, I started to take action. And we had that conversation in June 2019. And in February 2020, the book was published. And that whole journey took 8 years from the time I asked myself the question, why don't any of the characters look like my daughter, to having it published. That took 8 years.
Yeah, when you're moving in purpose, everything becomes so much easier and it all makes sense. It's the same with money. When you are spending your money or making financial decisions that are linked to
Yeah,
your purpose,
yeah.
it just makes things so much easier. So let's talk about the book. Your debut book is titled The Adventures of Amma and Kwessi in Barbados in the sparkling rainbow teacup and saucer. Without
Yes.
giving too much away, let's start with why you chose Barbados.
Yeah, great question. I chose Barbados because, like I said, I didn't know how to write a children's book, right? So I actually went onto Google and YouTube, like, how do I write a children's book? And then it talked about, where you set it, the plot, the characters, and that kind of stuff. So I was going through that exercise and I thought, well, where would I set my story? And then I thought, don't get too clever, Joyce. Start with what you know. And I decided to make it Barbados because that's part of my heritage. My heritage is Barbadian and Ghanaian, and the names Amma and Kwessi are Ghanaian names. And so I thought, okay, for the first book, I will set it in Barbados. And yeah, that was the reason why, because my grandma is from Barbados and she would share so many stories with me as a child. And I've been to Barbados a couple of times, and I was fortunate enough actually to meet my great grandfather. So I met my grandmother's dad on the first trip to Barbados, and that was inspiring as well. And I've pulled elements of that trip and included it in the book as well.
Oh, I love that. So that it's actually a piece of your life story in
Yeah,
that story. Oh,
a
wow, that's
little bit.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Another thing I've been wondering about the book is why a sparkling rainbow teacup and saucer?
Oh, fantastic question. So it's again, it's all part of who I am or the culture that I've grown up in, right? So I've grown up in the UK, and tea is a huge part of that. And so I wanted to incorporate or reflect all the different parts of the culture that make me me. So it's the Barbadian, the Ghanaian aspect, but also the British aspect as well. And I know tea is huge in the UK. So I wanted to incorporate that somehow. And so I decided to make the mode of transport a teacup and saucer because I was thinking, well, what could it be? I don't want to make it a car. It's not going to be a train. What else could it be? I mean, there's phone booths, there's all kinds of stuff. And so I decided a teacup and saucer would be my one.
Oh, fantastic, Joyce. I'm glad I asked that question because I've been wondering
Yeah,
for ages.
yeah, that is a
But
brilliant question. No one's asked me that before.
now people know. Now people know. Yeah, I bought a couple of copies for my niece and a friend's child, and yeah, and I thought, what is this all about? And I've waited years to ask you. I should have asked before. Now, Joyce, you've already told us that in addition to being a children's author, you are a business analyst and diversity and inclusion advocate. So, is there anything else about how these roles have influenced your writing, especially this book that we've spoken about? But are you planning on using your corporate experience to write other books?
Yeah, I would say that the diversity and inclusion aspect of what I do hugely influenced my approach and the stories that I've decided to tell, more so than the business analyst aspect. Yeah, and so as a result of that, I do try and incorporate all of that with the work that I do. So I try and create a space so that other people can share their stories as well. So rather than me just sharing a story in the book, the work that I do in the corporate world is create a space so that other people can have their stories shared as well, because that representation matters, and the impact of that, we just talked about it, that just enables you to either increase your empathy, because you might have no understanding of a particular experience this person has had, or it just helps you to realize that actually it is possible.
Great points, Joyce. And yeah, as we said right at the beginning, representation is so important. We've heard that saying, seeing is believing, right? So important. So in addition to your book and the other things that you do, how are you encouraging children, adults, and businesses to focus on the inclusion of underrepresented groups?
Yeah, so I have done like quite a few workshops at local primary schools. So by going into the local schools and being able to show them characters that don't look like them, I would hope that stays with them. It's just, that they get to access a culture that they wouldn't ordinarily access. And I've been able to do that, yeah, with children in local schools, and with childminders and their children as well. So I go around and do readings. I love reading to kids. It's just the best, and just seeing the expressions on their faces and everything else. So I've been able to do that in that way. With businesses as well, I work closely, like I said earlier, I work closely with senior leaders, looking at the content that they're producing and seeing, well, what story aren't we hearing? What perspective aren't we seeing or hearing from? And how can we do that? And reaching out to people from all these different backgrounds for them to share their lived experiences so that people can get access to that.
That's fantastic, Joyce. Another thing I know you do is you have created a safe space for female business owners to have conversations on Clubhouse. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I co-founded a club called Fempreneurs in Action with Louisa Martinez. And that came from a conversation that we had where we're both female entrepreneurs, but sometimes you struggle. You come across different situations and challenges and you think you need to do it all yourself. But we kind of reached out to each other and we were able to help each other. It's like, well, hold on, if we're feeling like this, what about the other female entrepreneurs? Wouldn't it be great if we could create a space so that other female entrepreneurs can come along, connect, collaborate, and create? And so we decided to do that. And we've been hosting rooms on a Monday evening at 8 o'clock ever since. So we've been doing it for over 6 months now. So that's been brilliant. That's been an amazing experience.
Well done, well done. And I have attended a few of those. They're fantastic and an amazing group of women who dial in on a Monday. So yeah, and 6 months, that's great. That's very good consistency, Joyce.
I know, especially from someone who would run away from technology. I've jumped in with both feet and I'm loving it. We need to have you back on again, Tsitsi.
Yes, I'm normally recording episodes for my podcast. But yes, I definitely have to make time. I definitely have to. So Joyce, looking back at all you have achieved so far, what would you say to your younger self now?
I would say be curious, be more curious, and challenge the status quo. That's what I would say. I've only learned to do that more as an adult, and probably in the last kind of 5 years where I've been more focused on inclusion in addition to the diversity. But I would say be more curious, because that's where the magic happens. It's through the curiosity, asking questions, reading, having conversations with people, that I was able to take myself on this journey as an author. Like I said, I was not one of those kids that was growing up thinking, when I grow up, I want to be an author. That wasn't on my radar at all. But by being curious and doing more digging and all the rest of it, this is what it's produced. So I would recommend that to my younger self.
100%. I think, curiosity is something that we need to continue having. I think as young children, we're so curious. And then as we get older, it disappears. I think the excitement of life and I think it is just the excitement of life kind of disappears, because more and more you seem to be focusing on the negative and problems. So I love that. Be curious and stay curious forever.
Definitely. Definitely.
So in a few words, please, would you tell us what you believe wealth means to you in the following areas: physical, mental, spiritual, social, and financial well-being?
I would say, wealth means choice for me. It means choice and it means empowerment, because then you can choose to do the things you love doing, and you will feel empowered. There will be no limitations on you when you have wealth in all those areas of your life. So that's what wealth means to me.
I absolutely love that. Also, because my method is called the Choices Blueprint. And
yes.
Yes. And I called it that because it is about choice. It's about choice. And I've broken the word choices down into 7 steps.
Yeah.
But yeah, really, really completely agree. It's about choices, and so we can become the designer of our financial future. So yes, I agree.
Absolutely.
100%.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Now, what is the best way for listeners to get in touch with you if they potentially want to work with you in a corporate capacity or purchase your books?
Yeah, so the best way to get in contact with me is through LinkedIn. And in terms of getting a copy of the book, it's available on Etsy. So if you look up The Adventures of Amma and Kwessi in Barbados, you will be able to get it.
Fantastic. And then, of course, they can find you on Clubhouse. What's your room called again on Clubhouse?
Yeah, it's called Fempreneurs in Action.
And I'm going to put the links in the bio so people can click on those and get to the book, your LinkedIn profile, and your Clubhouse room as well.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Joyce, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview and sharing a bit about your story and why you wrote that amazing children's book. I know that this is just the beginning of your journey as an author, and I can't wait to see what else you'll be bringing out in terms of your writing.
Thank you so much, Tsitsi. It's been great chatting to you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Connect with me at The Wealth Conversation on Facebook and Instagram so we can continue the discussion. Also, if you're ready to define what wealth truly means to you, then go to thewealthconversation.com and download the Wealth Cornerstones guide. Until next week, stay focused on becoming the designer of your financial future.